Men, do you ever feel like you just can't get ahead? Like you're misunderstood? Like you have no one to talk to that truly hears you?
And women, are you often frustrated, hurt, and saddened in your relationships with the men in your life?
What if there were a community of like-minded men going through the same challenges that would support, hear, and understand what you're going through?
Working together in unison to create understanding, intimacy, and strong connections. That's the Way of the Illuminated Warrior.
Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show is a forum of candid conversations for men and women about men. Being a man today is not always easy. Until now.
All right, audience, thanks for joining us again for another episode of the Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show. I'm your host, Waska, here again with Patrick Paul Garlinger, and we have a special guest today that we're excited to introduce you to. He talks about a lot of the stuff that we get into, awakening, awareness. I think he's going to talk about the Sedona Method, which we'll let him get into. So if you like the content we're bringing, if you want more shows like this, please subscribe to us. Feel free to reach out to any of us with questions, comments, concerns. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to do the introduction to David.
All right. Thank you, Waska. Yes, I'm really excited to have a conversation today with our guest, David Ellzey, who has a remarkable story, and he is a coach, a speaker, he's an author, so he does it all, and he was, and perhaps still does in some way, has a long career as an actor. He was an actor for many, many years, and so brings that kind of background and presence to his work. And so want to just begin by welcoming you, David, to our show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you both.
Great. So I think since Waska brought it up, I'd love to start with this topic of the Sedona Method, which is something that you are an expert in. Based on what I've read, you're one of the very few people who's authorized to teach that. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the Sedona Method is, how it fits in maybe with other modalities, just to give us a sense of where you're coming from.
Sure. So the Sedona Method has been around since the 70s. And it was created by a gentleman who was told he was going to die after a second heart attack. Lester Levinson, in New York City in 1952. And he went home to wait it out. His doctor said, don't tie your shoes because you could keel over, and just make some calls and get everything in order.
Wow.
And so he went home, and he was an engineer, scientist engineer. And the way that mind works, as you may know, a bit different than us creative artists, and yet we may still have this kind of curious mind. He had the impulse to say, what is going on? And there's still a chance because I'm breathing. So let's look at this. Let me be my petri dish. And what's happening in me? And he found a lot of emotions, a lot of fear and angers and resentments and revenge and just a lot of pain. And so he sat in his easy chair overlooking Central Park. He was a successful man. So he had a penthouse in South Central, the street, which I think is 59th. Looking over Central Park. And for 3 months, he looked inside and he saw all his emotions, and he kind of took each one and said, okay, for instance, he had a girlfriend he thought he was going to marry, and he came home and found her with another gentleman.
Oh, wow.
And it scarred his heart for life. And so he looked at that moment and said, I'm really angry with her. I hate the guy. So I don't really want to take this with me. So what's my option? So he thought, well, I have anger and rage and non-love. So what if I switched it? Because remember, he had this impulse. He knew he was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So he had nothing to hold on to, any reason to hold on. So he switched it with love, and he experimented. It's not that easy for all of us to do just willy-nilly, but he was about to die. So you can imagine the pressure was high, and the crisis was at the edge. The precipice was near. So he said, okay, let me try this. Let me love her anyway. And when he did that, his body shifted a little bit. He felt energetically something shift, which naturally it does. The difference between hate and love is a deeply different energetic feeling in the body, chemical as well. And so he felt that. And he said, well, okay, what if I love the guy too, for heaven's sake? Let's try that. And his body shifted again. And let me see them making love, and let me see them married. Let me see them happy. And when he did that, he felt a major shift.
Yeah.
And what he discovered over his 3 months of doing this was he asked himself, what do I want? And his realization was, I want to be happy. Okay. From a dogmatic viewpoint, when am I happiest? And this is the crux of the Sedona Method in a way. He said, I'm happiest when I'm loving, not when I'm getting love.
Right.
Which was a big surprise to him. So he squared everything with love. That was his phrase, everything in his life for 3 months. And his body awoke so much that he had so much energy, chi, prana, life force was awakened and not constricted by his emotionality, that he walked, the story goes, for 3 days through Manhattan without taking a break or eating or sleeping, because he awoke all the life force, the cosmic force that is beating our hearts without hindrance. But there was a problem. At the end of those 3 days, he said, I'm really, really ecstatically happy, but this wasn't here before. And if it wasn't here before, that means it had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, it could end. That means it's a state of happiness. I don't want a state. I want the absolute source of all happiness. He said, I don't want a piece of the pie. I want the pie. So he let go of holding on to the happiness. And when he did that, that's when the sense of his lesser self, his limited sense of being, a separate entity from all of life, disappeared, and he felt his unlimited nature. And so for 20 years, he tried to convince other people, this is what you are. You're this too. And he noticed the mind and, a lot of belief systems saying, yeah, I get it intellectually, but I'm not there yet. And all these phrases we still hear today, that we say today. And so in the 70s, he realized what's holding the self, the small self, in place, which is the perception of not enough or not having, and something lacking, incomplete, which is what we all feel on some level. And that perception itself is what he realized needed to be let go of. So he perceived it as wanting to survive, wanting control in the world to survive, wanting love to survive. So his essence of the Sedona Method, the first of 7 ways, was essentially own and name, claim, admit that there's a wanting to survive here, some wanting security or safety. And if you let it go, if you put it down for a moment, or you have amnesia, you forget it for a second, there's this automatic inflow of self-recognition that in this moment I lack nothing. That's the peace and the freedom that the Sedona Method points to. And there's 7 other ways to release, which I can talk about at some point. But the essence is, you're already, all of us listening, are the aspects the same as life itself, unlimited, proactive, the force of the universe beating our hearts, multiplying trillions of cells while I talk to you. That's who we are.
Right.
And so the Sedona Method is about letting go of the perception, any perception that we're not that.
Beautiful. And I love this story of this person's awakening that sounds like, and we can get into that, happened very organically on his own. I'd be interested to hear kind of a little bit more about, whether he had other, teachings and information that was already available to him or not. But we can dive into that in a moment. I'm actually more interested to hear, and we'll come back to the Sedona Method, but I'm really interested to hear then how you came to that. And then it'd be interesting for each of us to share a little bit about our kind of contact with these moments of awakening, which you just described. So where were you when you discovered the Sedona Method? What was going on in David's life?
I was in college. I was at SMU, Southern Methodist University, in my first year. And we were at a party. I was in a friend's house with others. And I got in my car. This was age 17 or 18. And I got in my car and I started screaming expletives, hitting the seat and hitting the steering wheel. And I was enraged with myself for having been in the party and being as fake as I was. It was like I wasn't even there. What I liken it to is I was in prison inside myself. I was false. And I hated that because all my life up till that point, I'm very loving and kind and gentle. That's my parenting, but it's also my essence. I'm just naturally that way. But I was also aware of suppressing feelings and emotions and at the risk of not being liked and all that. So I got in the car and I just screamed. And I had 10 years of those kinds of explosions. And then I had somebody I was dating and she said, you know what, you should try the Sedona Method. And you know how it goes when someone points a finger and says, you should. So I didn't do it until we broke up. And then when we broke up, I did the Sedona Method. Oh, how about that? I think I'll choose that now, So I learned it when I was 28 and did it for, 28. And for another number of years, I was using it. And then in 96, I became an instructor, a licensed global instructor of the Sedona Method. Because I've always been spiritual, in essence, curious to the appearance of life and what's really behind it all. And that started when I was about 14. I got tired of telling false stories and stories that other people wrote and based on conflict. And it began to feel false to me. So I learned the Sedona Method, and then I began to switch places and my life work from acting to teaching. And so now I coach full-time and teach courses. And yesterday, I just finished a course called What's Love Got to Do with It? And we use the Sedona Method, but also now the transition has been, this is why I said it's interesting. I consider myself a Sedona Method global instructor, licensed instructor. However, it has become really clear that what my role, I believe, is on the planet is to support awakening to full consciousness, to unlimited being. And the Sedona Method is one tool, the major tool, but I also use mindful breath, sacred breathing, inquiry, silence, sometimes embodiment exercises to wake up awakening in form in the body. So my practice now is a consciousness practice, of which the Sedona Method is sort of the main tool, but not the only one.
Fabulous. So I realize that I am sort of monopolizing you at the moment, and I wanted to give my co-host Waska an opportunity to jump in here. I could just keep talking to you, David, but So Waska, what questions jumped out at you, just hearing David's, background here in his story?
So listening to you, it sounds very, very much like Eastern philosophy, like Buddhism and Taoism, just the tenet of, all sentient beings not wanting to suffer and to avoid suffering, to be happy, which it sounds it's very similar to that. So that really resonates with me. And the other thing you were saying about, it sounds like it's very, very steeped in love, which really, to me, and in all the philosophies and all the great masters, love is the answer. The question is irrelevant. Love is the answer. So I love that. I love the love of that. It's pretty amazing. So I'm wondering, because I don't know a lot about you. Patrick and I have shared our journeys before, and just real briefly, I grew up in an alcoholic family and all that went along with that, and being shy and bullied and couldn't find my power and the unworthiness in speaking. So I'm wondering, I'd love to go back to, when you were a little boy, even, how far back you even remember, and what those, I will call them traumas, which we could get into also. What were the traumas that you felt that you had to overcome to really find your voice?
I'm lucky in that I didn't have major traumas. However, in terms of abuse or boundaries being inappropriately crossed in any way. However, my family, which was a very kind family, my dad was a pastor in the Methodist church, and my mom was a very loving woman. She helped shape who I am and how I feel about myself because of her affirmation. But what was missing, which I've had to deal with in my life, instead of a trauma that forced me into positions of emotionality, what we were missing was the freedom to talk about emotions. So everything was pretty suppressed except kindness. which is a weird kind of mix.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm glad that was the one that wasn't that was allowed, but I never learned that emotions or strength of emotions or passion was okay. And so I had this very staid kind of nice guy image. Everybody said, David's such a nice guy. And I have that component. I'm honored and joyful that I do, but I was afraid of my own anger. I was afraid of extreme emotions. And so my trauma wasn't as much an event as a deep suppression of aspects of being human.
Yeah.
And so them exploding in my life was the beginning at age 17, 18 that I told you the story about. But even today, I have to look at, you know, when something rises, am I open? Am I free to have compassion for it? Am I gentle with it? Am I allowing it? Am I consciousness and open awareness in which it's arising? So that's the practice. The Zen phrase that I love so deeply is practice is enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of trying to get to a state, it means your present state with whatever's coming and going remains awake and aware. And that's what enlightenment would be referred to. Thich Nhat Hanh says beautiful things. He says, you have to be your mother's arms, the mother's arms. Not you have to never have feelings.
Right.
You have to be the mother's arms with what's coming and going. So I don't really have that trauma, Waska, as you're referring to, but that's been my journey of having to do some clearing of hindrances to my expression and my passion and my alive energy. So that's been my journey.
Yeah.
Let me follow up with that because it's interesting. So you said you had the anger, which is very present. I mean, I've worked with a lot of guys over the last 20 years, and anger is an emotion that is either repressed or comes out in various different ways, as we know. Obviously, you seem like a very even-keeled, calm, centered, balanced man. I also feel like emotions buried alive never die. So do you feel like that you've really transmuted that anger? And if so, how? Because in my experience, it doesn't naturally, not usually anyway, just dissipate. It needs to be recognized, transmuted, worked with. So, if you'd speak to that a little bit would be great.
It's a great, great question. Yes, I haven't worked a lot with anger in the sense of trying to transmute or transform it. What has happened, however, is when you explore understanding that who you are is more than just your emotionality or your thinking, then when you have it, it doesn't have the same sway over you because of the spiritual understanding, which is very real. I'm not talking about cliches or memes or Post-its on the refrigerator. I mean, really seriously understanding the expansiveness of being. And so because I've done that work for a few decades now, when something rises, I don't even feel like I need to transmute it. It's just high energy. It's a wave of the energy of the universe, of the ocean through me. And I'll tell you for an example, I get very mad at technology because I'm on it all day as I build classes and the back end of the sales marketing and the landing pages and the emails, the marketing email, all that. And so when you're tired, and I'm a very alive physical person, when I have to constrict that essence of my being into digital finger activity, digital meaning digits of the finger, and digital activity, I really feel like it's energy that just wants to explode. And then the internet goes out, or the old computer that I had before I got this one last week was going slower and slower and slower. And I was in a hurry, or I wanted to go to sleep and this wasn't working and I needed to get it out before I go to bed. So I was like in a prison, a rock and a hard place. And I would just let out great expletives, very juicy, like strings of juicy expletives. But it doesn't mean anything. That's the difference now, it doesn't mean, I don't feel constricted by it, is what I'm saying. So the good thing about this regarding your question, my anger doesn't color my life. It doesn't make me have compulsive activities, which I need to worry about. It doesn't intrude on relationships. It just comes periodically and usually alone. I'm very predictable. You know, when you do this work long enough, you guys, and whoever's listening, you begin to really know yourself. It's like, I'm tired, technology's not working, I'm going to curse. That's just how it works, you know? And then you go, God, yeah. And you go, yep, that was that. Anymore? No, that was it for now. So that's how it's been dealt with for me. I do believe if it's an issue for somebody in terms of intruding in their healthy living, in their well-being, then the Sedona method is powerful in that it gives us freedom and permission and tools to own that we have it, but we also are consciousness, which is even more than just the anger. And then we use the tools and have some sense of larger being than just the emotion itself. And that's a discovery by itself. So
we'll be right back after this. Do you sometimes feel down, lost, or lonely? Are your finances feeling sluggish? Can your relationships use a healthy tune-up? Don't fear, bro. Help is here. Experience the benefits of connecting with other men who are going through similar challenges. Be supported in our safe, sacred, and inspiring monthly telecircle with the Brotherhood of the Illuminated Warriors. Connect with Waska for one-on-one mentoring with the first session completely free. What have you got to lose? Check out ILLUMINATEDWarrior.com or send an email to waska@ILLUMINATEDWarrior.com. You're invited to step up your game and join us. You'll be glad you did.
David, I just wanted to follow up on what you said and Waska's questions, because I could speak to a couple traumas as a child, but I actually have a similar history like yours, in that for the most part my family was actually very kind and very loving, and allowed a lot of I came out of the closet in high school, immediate acceptance, a lot of my life was quite loving. But what you said about emotion not being able to be shared really resonated, and that was similar. My childhood was similar, and I found that my parents, my mother, couldn't really handle sort of a lot of emotion. And so I too developed a kind of stoic, very even-keeled demeanor, and that served me well, except that then emotions weren't allowed to be shared. And that you were describing the sort of that first stage of just allowing emotion to come up, the expletives to come out and not be attached to sort of any meaning.
Right. It's also the spirit. No,
right.
My fault. Please keep going. Keep going.
No, and I was going to say, not driving your behavior. But when we get into what Waska was referring to, sort of transmuting, where I've noticed, my own patterns of having to learn around my anger and realizing that anger scared me because I hadn't been allowed to really explore it. It was all sort of tamped down, and learning that, having permission to just be emotional and outwardly emotional and express it and not have it mean anything and not need anybody to do anything was really important. And then looking under the hood a little bit more as to sort of, why does this particular situation, really upset me? And understanding sort of, the belief systems beneath there, and then being able to understand where I felt I was lacking power, which is for me often, the link between anger and the sort of belief somehow I don't have power or agency here. So I wanted to follow up, because you were getting into kind of what the techniques are for sort of looking at, and it doesn't have to be limited to the Sedona method, because you mentioned that you do work with inquiry and things like that. How do you work with people who are, sort of dealing with, these sorts of triggers, as it were?
I often think about the idea that I've been coaching now for thousands of hours. I think 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 hours over my lifetime. And I've often thought about writing a book called The 5,000 Hour Conversation, because it's one conversation for every coaching. It's the same one. And that is that we have some emotion triggered by something in the world, or a feeling or a belief. And if we investigate beneath, like you said, like either what's triggering it, why is it there, or fundamentally, what does it bring up in terms of a sense of lack?
Mhm.
And then the processing is letting go, or meditation, and then the revealing, the revelation. In fact, this is the 4 steps that I teach in my signature course, is the 4 steps of awakening, which is tell a story. It's okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Without judgment. I mean, limited story.
Right.
And then the second is look beneath the story. What's really here? And then the third is, what do you do with that? Either pure awareness can help it dissolve a bit,
Mhm.
and that's fine. Sometimes it needs a little bit more work, either releasing or any of the techniques that are out there. But
Right.
what you brought up is important to me, in that there are a lot of spiritual techniques and therapy and psychology work that is really good at uncovering. But for me, the essential part is, what do you do with what you find?
Mhm.
So the Sedona Method for me is the safe way. And so the segue into your asking about the tools and techniques, I'll just do it in a summary. The first is recognizing that we perceive lack. And
Mhm.
when we let that go, we don't even perceive. We are the abundance that we're seeking. We are the unlimited presence of the consciousness of the universe, right here in human form. We don't see it because we perceive lack. So when we dissolve it, we are revealed to be self-evident. So that's the first one. And then there's a progression of tools that you can use anywhere along. One is called holistic, one of my favorites, because this whole 3-dimensional realm is based on polarities. You have to have comparative reality for all this to appear. Something has to be, and next to it, it's not. So that's how you see
Right.
it. Or open, closed, all that. So there's actually a technique where you ask yourself, if you're depressed or angry, can you allow yourself to be that as much as you are, not bigger, not smaller, just what's here? And then also, have you ever not been angry? Have you ever loved? Have you ever petted a pet or held your baby and looked in its eyes? So your physiology has that in it. You know what that feels like. So you're not totally this. It's impossible. So
Exactly.
these 2 parts, opposing parts, when you do the technique of allowing both one by one, alternating, the brain actually begins to fuse out. Matter and antimatter begin to disappear. The particles and the opposite particles in the quantum field, everything begins to pop out of existence when you bring them close enough. And so when you do that, all that's left is present awareness. So that's called holistic. And then there's, it goes, I won't explain a lot more, but the final one is just called the no way. And what it means is, it's not even asking you to do anything. It's just asking the question, is this appearing? That's one question. Number 2, is it possible that it's appearing but not to a someone? Is it possible it's appearing within and as awareness or consciousness or life or God? You choose. And then the third question is it possible that that which is rising is already the absolute consciousness that you're seeking?
Right. So, David, we've been talking a lot about, anger and how to work with that, and the kind of steps that the Sedona Method has for, sort of letting go. And I'm curious, in your work, if you've noticed that whether there are particular emotions that are harder for your clients, particularly your male clients, to access, let go of. And I'm asking this because, I do think that, men generally have, and I know I'm speaking in sort of a sweeping generalization, but, there's definitely studies that confirm that men have often suppressed their emotions more and don't have access to the same range. But anger being one that is sort of much more socially sanctionable, are sanctioned. I'm wondering if there are emotions that you find that are much harder to access, and what you do to work with clients who are having trouble with them.
Yeah, It's a broad question. My experience is that I always come back to one thing, and that is whatever we're suppressing, it's because we have beliefs that we're not supposed to show up, that we're not supposed to behave in this way, or we're supposed to behave in this way. And that goes for both male and female and the multi-gendered options in between. There's this impulse to suppress, right? And that's a cultural thing. It's a society, generational, national, sometimes family-based. We have many, many rules. And so I don't know how to answer your question in terms of a specific emotion, because I have them all in my clients. I have people of all walks. Now, in terms of the male experience, or the generally considered male experience, to me, the reason we get angry is on some level, either we've been hurt and we don't know how to process it. In fact, the great American poet James Baldwin said people with hatred don't want to give up their hatred because then they have to feel they're hurt. And it was very astute. He was talking about white supremacy and things like that, where hatred feels so familiar and there's strength in it. But if you really let go, you feel the denial of your own well-being in your family or in a culture. You feel suppressed by the nation or something where you're not dealing with hurt. So whatever emotion it is. And for men, I think there has been, or at least in the masculine angle, there has been this suppression of power has been unhealthily taught to be powerful, meaning force, aggression, assertiveness. And that's been part of the problem of the feminine movement in society, to try to be like that of men. And what I think is happening in the human species, and to add something interesting here, is this generational, this gender line that's beginning to blur more publicly. It's always been here, right? Homosexuality and heterosexuality, it's been this intermingling throughout history. When binary was not a person's reality and he or she was more not just sexual, but multi-energetic, they thought of them as sacred, because they included the whole of the consciousness within one human body. So they perceived it that way. And so this suppressing of whatever we truly are in terms of the way we need to express as humans creates this, what happened in my car. I exploded at age 17 and 18 because I was suppressing my own energy of being, my earnest, authentic presence, what I really felt about things or didn't feel about things. It wasn't okay. So when you suppress that much energy, it explodes because it has to move, right? And it explodes in disease or illness or abuse. And so it's all unconscious until one spiritually looks at it and owns it and recognizes this is something that's going on. What's my most healthy way of processing it? And that step disassociates in the healthy way for a moment into witness capacity, and then you can do the work. So holistic is really a powerful releasing technique. I am so enraged right now. I just want to kill. I just am so much energy is coming through. And this person that I just adore and love, I also know what it feels like to adore and love. I have to admit that I do. I can't deny it. But it takes a conscious person who's able to have altitude to do the two. And so there's a spiritual awakening which is required for somebody that's dealing with a lot of emotions that I believe in. People come to me from that camp of people who are called to have a spiritual sense of being more than just an emotional sense. So that was a really long answer, but I'm hoping it dropped a few seeds in there.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to say is first that how much I appreciate your sensitivity to the nuances of gender. As a gay man, I use the word male, and yet that word has capacious meaning, and it doesn't refer simply to cisgender males. Our notions of gender are becoming, thankfully, much more complicated, and the ways in which we may talk about sort of men having experiences, whatnot, now, ought to be understood to be much more refined and should be sensitive to, sort of the non-binary identifications, people who identify as queer, and that may be different. Obviously, there are trans men. So the term has a lot. And so I appreciate your sensitivity to that.
Sure. And if I may just insert for a minute, Patrick, it's an exploration we have to walk through because, as I say, it's been suppressed throughout time. I mean, the Roman Empire and, people in Congress, and nobody talks about it, but there's these multiple self-identities under the surface of this superimposed perception of man and woman, male and female. That was really superimposed. And so we're fighting within ourselves how to deal with this. And it's really not easy, but it harkens back to my point that we are ultimately consciousness. We're an entire universe in a body. I mean, literally, not esoterically. We are the elements and the periodic table and the minerals of Saturn and Venus and the galaxies. So you're looking at the universe, the galaxies in a human body. So to name that a specific gender, to label it anything, to me is the limitation. And so all of us together, ideally together, are attempting to come out of an ancient, old, superimposed self-perceptions into freedom with as much love and acceptance as we can garner, which is hard because we hold on to our perceptions as self, belief systems as that's who I am. But if we can do this together, Teilhard de Chardin once said, I'm going to paraphrase, but it's beautiful. He said, if we can harness love, we will have the second arrival for humanity of fire. So fire changed the planet, and love in the right kind of way, dealing with our own challenges, but honestly and kindly, it is, and I hope it actually is changing the planet. It's just kind of messy, so we just have to do our best.
You said some really great things there that just come full circle for me, David. So the repression part is huge because I think, and it's not just men, but because I've had so much experience working with men, I've seen it and heard it so many times, that suppression of anger, that suppression of guilt, of shame, of blame. And you made a really good point about the Hopi Indians, because I really resonate with Native American cosmology, and I have a lot of Native American friends and relationships. So what the Hopi and other indigenous cultures have done, which we do not really do anymore, that saying of it takes a village. So just as you were speaking to about, if you were, and they didn't even call it transgender there, if you didn't know your identity, if you did a crime, if you lost your way, it wasn't like, okay, let's put this person in jail, let's flog them, let's beat them, let's punish them. The community would gather around, and rather than punish them, they would actually help them to figure out where this disconnection was, where this blockage was, where this emotion was that was causing them to do this. And we do not do that in this culture anymore, and that's why I believe there's so much disconnection, there's so much repression of emotions that turns into anger, that turns into frustration, that turns into violence and crime. And another part of what you said there, like the women's movement, which there shouldn't even be, we're 2023, there shouldn't be a women's movement anymore. We should not be men here, women there. We should be equal. And I don't like to should, but we really should be on an equal playing field by now. But it's, been a patriarchy that doesn't support that. And communities that are not going back to, which I really feel like we need to, that old way of like, let's be a village and let's support each other and raise each other up. So the things you were saying in there just kept clicking off like, wow, this is what we really need to do to elevate and, and be as one. So thanks for sharing that and sparking that in me. Yeah,
you bet. The thing is that the journey to that, I don't know that, I think when you bring up indigenous peoples and indigenous cultures prior to Western, quote, civilization, had a lot of societal values of that. So in our society in the West, we haven't had that yet. I mean, even the Constitution, wasn't talking about we the people as everybody. It's talking about those who were white landowners, basically. It was in the Constitution that people of color and women weren't full humans. So at one time. So we're creating, for me, the first time when we're bringing these ancient principles into actuality. And I say it's messy because we've all been entrained just by the atmosphere and the ocean of systems that has these minor and major limitations on equality. And so we're all learning this together. And that's the whole thing when Black Lives Matter was working so much, being white, we had to really, and do still have to really own what's systemically we're entranced by it, and even though we don't know it, so we have to really own how we are that way. But I wanted to add here what you just said, Waska, was really beautiful. That the other thing that I don't remember the indigenous tribe, but one of them, like you said, when someone would lose their way, one of the habits of this tribe was to, or the culture was to create a song for every child. Maybe you know this, huh? And so when the child, and so they had their personal song their whole life. And when they lose their way, they would put them in the middle of the whole town or the village around them, and they would sing their song to them as long as they needed, until the person in the center would be moved enough to be held with that love and affirmation to be transformed again. And so
how beautiful is that, right? How beautiful is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're learning
and
right now.
Yeah. I mean, and that speaks to kind of the core, probably one of the core things that goes back to lack of just not feeling seen, of not feeling that you belong. And I'm wondering that within this context of discussing, these shifts and how you're working, and you've been describing kind of the work with individuals, but within a kind of a broader vision of that this is work that's for healing, sort of historical legacy. You just made reference to the Constitution and the sort of the embedded inequalities in that document, which we could have a long and rich conversation about. The systemic issues that have, in terms of like systemic racism and Black Lives Matter. All of these things then lead me to want to ask you about the work that you're doing when you do kind of corporate seminars, and you're bringing this work to a domain where they may not be open overtly to spirituality.
Sure. I'd like to say two things, basically. The first is, just to complete and then segue on what we were talking about, is ultimately the work that I do, because I'm not out in the streets protesting, or I'm not, my feeling, and I've questioned myself a lot about where do I put my body for this transformation of humanity that I'm interested in. And what I've come down to is my work and where my competencies lie is in being very, very good at investigating and dissecting. I have a very good brain for that. And when I was a boy, I took toys apart first because I wanted to know how they worked. And I still do that, but it's with the human being. So I'm the same as I was then. And so my realization really that I can rest in is that supporting humanity one by one, and groups and courses and trainings and companies, allowing every human being that I know that chooses to be with me on this path, my job is to help uncover what ultimately is love, but uncover the awakened awareness that we are more than our limitations, which includes all the systemic racism and genderism and everything. We are more than that. But one of the ways to do that is to have a large enough sense in which those can be transformed. So that's what awakening consciousness means to me, is that we do the work, but it's with the purpose, for me, in my work, of awakening to the unlimited presence, which is talking, which is hearing, which is this technology. And that's my ultimate work with people. And then they may be moved to be in the world. I do have people who are very proactive. but I'm supporting them to come from power and strength of knowing who they are rather than just reactivity of childhood.
Right.
So that's my work. Now, to translate that into corporate setting, I was brought into a program that had already been there for about 20 years. And it's called Wisdom at Work. And it's the principle that the workplace where we are most of the time, many people are, millions and billions of people, is actually the best place for personal and spiritual transformation. Because you're triggered by many people, many human behaviors, many circumstances that trigger all your old stuff. The goal of it is for people to utilize the workplace to see what's they're triggering and to find ways to be centered and empowered, to be in a peaceful state, calm state, clear nervous system, so less well, the word just the opposite of adrenaline. Cortisol begins to dissolve from the brain, so clear thinking can happen. So I teach breath work, I teach mindfulness, I teach open conscious awareness, and I teach letting go. So these people have tools wherever they are in their role in the corporation to emanate a different energy, and that's impacting people around them. So that's how I see my work in the corporate setting.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear as well from Waska on this. I have often felt similarly about the workplace because I was a lawyer for many years, and that's a domain of very high stress. A lot of people get triggered. You're dealing with all sorts of, sort of demands, and there's a lot of notoriety around lawyers who get angry and throw things and yell at associates and yell at the paralegals, and it's interesting because mindfulness has begun to make its way into law firms. I'm curious, kind of what settings maybe you've noticed where it's sort of more open or there's more demand for it, and whether that includes, Hollywood, TV, those sorts of settings where I'm sure there's a lot patterns and triggers, a lot that happen as well.
There's a lot of that, but there's also the thing about actors is there's something. I'm going to be careful.
Don't be careful. Don't be careful. Be spontaneous, David. Be spontaneous. We could always edit it out. I won't, but go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for the lie up front. That's good. Because I was in the industry so long, and because I see the industry, I watch the industry to a certain degree. There are countless actors who have this sense of consciousness, of well-being and health in the world, well-intended hearts. There's many actors, and the reason is, and I'll speak from a personal experience, I guess, is because when you're an actor, you're asked to step into an unknown realm. You don't know what a scene's going to be like. You can design what I think about Anthony Hopkins, the master he is, because he designs to a degree, but then he doesn't know. He's talked about this. He's a very spiritual being. If you look him up on TikTok, he's just inspiring as can be, talking about the truth of the present moment and the power of not knowing. And it's beautiful. So actors have this, they're asked, and if they happen to already have this bend or a calling, they see this journey as sort of like court jesters in these courts of the world through film, where they're bringing something of spirit, something of inspiration. I mean, theater wasn't theater. Theater used to be spiritual storytelling to perpetuate stories of tribes. And in the Greek theater, it began to become the story of myth and then with time, entertainment. But it's sacred in its origin, because if you think about the stage, prior to props, I studied as a mime when I was 17. And I studied with a mystic, a sacred teacher. And so he taught me that the stage, and he was probably perhaps my most important teacher, he taught me that the stage is empty. So I have to be empty. in order to portray everything. Pretty profound. And when you're 17 or later, because all ages were there, his name was Samuel Avital, and I still communicate with him. He still inspires me because I knew that he saw me. He had a twinkle and a fierceness. So I'd be performing a little bit and he'd go, "No, David, no." Little guy, "Don't do it. Just do it." You know, he was inviting me to not be the egoic doer, but he would say, "Who's the artist in this moment? Everybody see, it's him. Don't be the artist. Let the artist be the artist." Meaning God, consciousness, life, unveiled reality, pour through you as an actor, as a mime on stage. So it's obviously a metaphor for our existence. You know, we're trying to be the actor, the doer, the fixer, the savior, but really we're already infinite cosmic energy right here as a body, as a name, as a story. So we don't have to act out being somebody. So I don't know how I got on that, but the impulse is actors, this is in response to your question. Actors have this sacred relationship to the mysticism of the stage and the emptiness of a set where you have all this going on. And yet inside them, they have to bring some mystery to portray a character that isn't them and yet uses all of them to create. So there's something about that. And so Hollywood, there's a lot of mindfulness, meditation, a lot of work, a lot of therapy, a lot of inner work being done there.
I can't help but ask Waska, because you come to this from the sort of camera lighting, that sort of work and I'm curious whether the workplace feels like it has those elements of mindfulness, or the actor as this sort of mystic is kind of prioritized, and then whether that sort of sense of presence and awareness is brought to bear on all of the other relationships who are in support of that, or whether that's sort of where it ends.
Well, it's a great question, and listening to both of you, not to interrupt you, because I've done a lot of corporate work, so I've worked with a lot of lawyers, and New York lawyers in particular. They are a very interesting breed. I'll just leave it at that. So, I was a former New York lawyer. So. That's why I'm leaving it at that. Yes. So it's really interesting, listening and responding to your question. To me, ever since I really started working and doing personal transformation work and knowing myself, it doesn't matter to me if I'm sitting in front of lawyers or working, with Hollywood, movie stars. I mean, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of famous people. I mean, I worked on Don't Look Up, so I worked with a dozen of the top A-list actors, and people say, "Oh, what was it like working with Leo or Meryl Streep?" Or, and I'm like, well, first of all, I don't know them. Okay. So if I've had any conversations with them, they may have been one or two or three times. I still don't know them. They're just like David said, they're portraying somebody else. So, to have these preconceived notions of anyone, whether they're actors, lawyers, politicians, we really need to come from a place of bringing it full circle, like David was talking about before, from that place of love and equanimity and compassion, and just really trying to connect with people, because it doesn't matter if you're a Hopi Indian out in Hotovia, reservation, or if you're a lawyer in New York City, or if you're an A-list actor. It really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we're all the same. So for me, my biggest awakening was to, just really be me and listen to people and be compassionate and try to connect the best I can. I don't care who you are, because we all had mothers and fathers, and we could relate in that way. And if there's ego in there, that's a whole nother ball game, which we could discuss another time. So I hope that answered your question. And because we're coming really close to time, I just want to pass around the virtual talking stick one more time for anything left unsaid, because this has been a really rich, great conversation. So I want to thank you, David, and you, of course, Patrick, for your great insights and questions also. So let's start off, with David, how you'd like to, close up anything left unsaid.
Well, you when we start thinking and talking about theater, film, and acting, to me, it's a sacred thing. One thing that Samuel said is, when you're on that stage, it is a sacred time because someone has agreed to give you their attention. That's holy. What will you do with that? Is it your ego, or are you wanting to be of service? So all my performing, especially my mime, and now when I'm teaching, I still use mime. Like, for instance, there's nothing between me and you, but the mime puts up an illusory wall, right? It's very real. It's very real. Can't you see it? When I was 5, yeah, thanks.
That was fantastic.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Very
Well, I got a whole toolbox. But that's how I use it, because we have these perceptions of something between, and the only thing about it, the only thing that's real, is we're holding it up. Right? So I use mime still to accentuate spiritual principles into more understanding, from concepts to physical understanding on a visual level. So that was my study. And so what I wanted to ask you, Waska, was, when I think about a set where you have all the different departments, to me, when I walked on a set, there was still this feeling of some kind of creative unfolding that none of us could control, and yet we were all a part of. I loved it. And so I wondered if your experience, on some level, you can understand what I was referring to, this kind of mysterious unfolding.
So you just to make sure I'm clear, do I understand the mysterious unfolding?
When you were on a set, did you personally, it's more of a personal question to you,
Sure.
Did you kind of have a sense sometimes of this? I don't know, I'm very reflective, so anywhere I go, I kind of see the whole thing. So did you ever have this awe, perhaps, of how this all comes into being, or how a scene unfolds, or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is a gift, and a privilege to be able to see it from behind the scenes, to hear the director, to see the process, to watch an actor do the same scene multiple times with the same enthusiasm, the same emotionality. It's pretty amazing. And then to see, of course, the final product, to see it on screen, and to remember what happened behind the scenes, and the direction and the interjection of, actor and director. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing. I'm not going to belittle it. I mean, I've been doing this almost 40 years. So to a degree, I get a little I don't want to take it for granted, but it's an amazing process. So yes, I will say it's a privilege, and it's an amazing thing to see, because we watch TV and I think we take things for granted, or movies. I mean, you're probably the same way, like the continuity or that, but we just accept things for the way they are. Like, how could that even just happen? We just accept it. So it's the movie magic of television, but also, the amazing things that go into it. It truly is. It's an amazing experience. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I feel a camaraderie with people in the arts, performing arts. But what's beautiful about what you just said is, I'll answer your question to me about the talking stick, because what you just did, you handed me the most holy context for my life, which is just like theater, and just like a film set or a theater performance, where you have the setting and design and costumes and actors and lighting and technicians. In life, this is a overused metaphor, but to me it's a powerful one. In this thing we're doing, this interview, we're each playing a role. The question not is what role, but are we open to the unfolding of the unknown to reveal something quite gracious and beautiful? Or are we superimposing what we need to control in order for our personal fears and histories to play out in this moment, to try to feel more safe? So the metaphor of the stage and theater, to me, and film, may not be as relatable for many people, but I love it as a metaphor. because we just did a scene together. And all we did our prep, and we brought who we are, but we had no knowledge of how it's actually going to unfold. So to complete for me, that's what I would invite to put on the table for listeners and watchers, is the possibility that life is actually unfolding in a way that we can't know and we haven't wanted to admit. So we try to control and we suffer. So we control what we can. We recognize the difference, the serenity prayer, and we know the difference between what we can and can't, and contribute, but also let go. And that creates a different kind of modus operandi for our daily living. So I invite people to live in the not knowing a bit more, and I'll bet they'll be happier.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Patrick, why don't you wrap us up?
Well, I don't want to, I think David said it all, although I'll say, yes, we ended up in a beautiful place, and I loved the fusion of the strands of your background, David, that basically we brought them really together in a way that wasn't intended. We didn't have a script. I, for one, didn't get the green M&Ms in my dressing room, so I don't know what kind of set we're on.
That's the next pay grade.
Clearly, I wasn't, no, I'm kidding. But I absolutely love what you say about just, sort of letting it unfold and seeing where we end up. So I think it was a beautiful note to conclude with and leave for our viewers. And I just wanted to thank you, David, for being here and having such a very gracious, kind, loving presence that you brought to the show, and all the wisdom that you shared with us today.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Beautiful. So thank you both. And let's all just continue to walk our paths in loving kindness.
Amen.
Visit IlluminatedWarrior.com if you'd like to go deeper and find out more about what's available within the Illuminated Warrior Men's Transformational Community. Tune in next time for more candid conversations for men and women about men on the Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show. Until next time, illuminate your path with loving kindness.